So this year we're doing a online webinar, but more excitingly, next year we will have a hybrid face-to-face and online conference to offer for members. So save the dates, 18th to the 20th of October 2023, the 2023 NAFEA conference, which will celebrate 20 years as an incorporated association, will be held in Cairns, the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef. And we anticipate that registrations will open up fairly soon. I'm hoping next week. So if your university has any funds that needs to be spent before the end of the year, make sure you get in and register as soon as it opens up. I'll let members know when the registrations are opened, and the website also will be updated with information on the conference. So I'd encourage any members who are interested in being part of the conference as a presenter, facilitator, or if you want to assist with the organisation of the conference, then get in contact with us. We're planning on the conference being a special event for a special occasion, so I hope to see many of you at the conference. Also wanted to quickly highlight a few of the recent activities of NAFEA. We recently finalised the second round of the NAFEA Equity Research Scholarships. We awarded 13 scholarships in total. One was awarded to Charles Sturt University, one to Flinders University, one to Griffith University, 8 to James Cook University. They cleaned up in the second round. One to University of Melbourne and one to the University of Tasmania. And that equated to a bit over $15,000 in scholarship funds to those 13 students. As many members would be aware, NAFEA has been offering the rural scholarship since 2017, and over time we've made some changes to the program. In 2020, we focused the scholarship on students who were experiencing financial hardship so that we could prioritise the funding to those that needed it the most. We've recently just commenced a review of the scholarship program, and we aim to make some tweaks to the program for the next round, which will open up in February next year, with a longer-term plan to expand the program to other historically disadvantaged groups. So I'm keen to get a First Nations scholarship and a few other different scholarships targeted at particular groups. If you do have any feedback about the program, or if you want to get involved with the working party, then get in contact with me, and yeah, we'd love to hear feedback from members. NAFEA has also commissioned a research project to look at WIL costs for universities. A project team has been set up with Dr. Anne McLeod from Charles Sturt University and Elise Bailey from Griffith University as co-lead investigators. The project team are currently scoping the project, and we hope to hold some workshops in 2023, probably first or second quarter of 2023, to engage members and key stakeholders to gain some information around the costs of work-integrated learning for universities. The project will focus on the enablers, the barriers and the impacts of higher education providers paying for work-integrated learning activities, and also looking at the sustainability of maintaining collaborations between stakeholders. It's a very ambitious project, but nonetheless very important, I think, in the current climate. We're also exploring some additional communication platforms to allow members to get in contact easier. At the moment, we have forums on our website, so you can go into our website and you can create a discussion group, and people then can contribute to that. But we find that doesn't tend to get used very much. It's another platform to go into and to check. So we're looking at potentially other platforms. We've commenced using Microsoft Teams for our working parties, and it's likely that we'll expand that out to other purposes. So look out for more information in our regular communications. So that was all I wanted to cover as far as the welcome. So we'll move into the first session of the program. This is where I will just give an overview of the National Student Safety Survey. Welcome to those who just joined us. We are going to start with the first session, which will be an overview of the National Student Safety Survey. And I'll just share my screen. So I'll start off by just declaring that this is not an area of expertise for me. I'm just giving an overview of the National Student Safety Survey and highlighting some of the results that relate to work-integrated learning. I also acknowledge that this is quite a triggering topic and sensitive topic for many people. So hopefully I've dealt with it in a sensitive manner. Just want to double check, can everyone see the PowerPoint screen? Yes, all good? Excellent. Oops. So the National Student Safety Survey is funded by the Universities Australia, and the latest survey was undertaken in September to October 2021. And as you can see, a large number of students from a wide-ranging number of universities have participated in the survey. The survey has a couple of components to it. There's a quantitative survey, and there's also an accompanying qualitative research component, which includes 3 open-ended questions. And as you can see, a large number of students have also participated in the qualitative survey. Today, I will focus mainly on the quantitative survey, mainly because the qualitative survey didn't divulge any kind of information that sheds any light on work-integrated learning, whereas the quantitative survey has a number of questions within that survey that does pertain to work-integrated learning. So as I mentioned, this is the second survey. The first survey was done in 2016 and the results released in 2017. And that survey found that sexual violence was prevalent in universities, that 1 in 5 students had reported experiencing sexual harassment in a university teaching or social setting, and 6.9% of students had experienced sexual assault in 2015 and 2016. The survey also found that students who identify with diverse genders or sexualities were twice as likely to experience sexual harassment compared to their heterosexual or cisgendered classmates. And those students were at greater risk of interrupting or ceasing their university studies as a result of that. The 2021 survey, it found that 1 in 2 have experienced sexual harassment at least once in their lifetime. 1 in 6 within an Australian university context during their course, and 1 in 12 students had experienced sexual harassment in a university context in the last 12 months, which is pretty staggering statistics, really. And if anyone's got any questions during this part of the presentation, feel free to jump in. Really, this is to try and give you a bit of a background of the survey and student safety issues, so that when we get to the breakout session, you can continue the discussion around some of these topics that have been brought up as part of the National Student Safety Survey. When they looked at locations where sexual harassment occurred, by far the main spaces were general campus areas, university libraries. But 5.9% of students experienced sexual harassment in a workplace or professional placement context. And 12.5% of students experienced sexual harassment in online environments. So obviously when this survey was conducted, it was looking at a period where there was a lot of off-campus online activities happening. So 12.5%, I'm not sure whether that's comparable. I don't think it was asked in the previous survey, but certainly you would have expected some downturn in the on-campus harassment and sexual assault occasions, but that doesn't really seem to have occurred. When you look at gender and age, and particularly when sexual harassment intersects with racism, ableism, body shaming, diverse genders and sexuality, all of those things are compounded for the student. Female students, transgender and non-binary students are more likely to experience sexual harassment compared to cisgendered male students. And you can see there that 21.3% of females versus 7.6% of male students. And that's almost double for non-binary students at 40.3%, and transgendered a little bit higher than female students. Age groups, it's generally under 35s that are mainly reporting sexual harassment. Within the university context, the main age group is 22 to 24. But if you look in the last 12 months, the main age group is 18 to 21-year-olds. So it's those younger year groups that are experiencing the sexual harassment mostly. Students with a disability are also likely to experience sexual harassment more than other students. So 29.1% experience sexual harassment in a university context compared to 13.5% of other students. So that's more than double the other student population. If you look at the last 12 months, it's 13.7% versus 7%, so still nearly double the amount. First Nations students, likewise, are experiencing it more. 21.4% have been sexually harassed within a university context compared to 16% of the other population. And within the last 12 months, those statistics are 12% versus 8%. Students who identify with diverse sexualities, so pansexual and bisexual identifying students are at the higher end, so 39.7% of pansexual and 33.1% of bisexuals, compared to 13% of heterosexuals, so 3 times the amount in some cases. Within the last 12 months, it's 21.5% for pansexual, so very similar to the during the whole of the student's course. So yeah, still looking at three times, a bit more than 3 times for pansexual students compared to heterosexual identifying students. Domestic and international students, this was quite surprising for me because I was expecting that international students would actually be experiencing and reporting more sexual harassment, but it actually is domestic students. So 17.9% versus 8.6%. And within the last 12 months, 9% of domestic students have experienced sexual harassment compared to 4.4% international students. Now, we all know that sexual harassment and sexual assault are underreported. We also know that international students if they're coming from a different culture may have different definitions of sexual harassment and sexual assault. So I'm not sure whether that explains the differences in the reporting, but I found that an interesting statistic. Looking at the undergraduate and postgraduate split, postgraduate students are actually more likely to be reporting sexual harassment on a WIL experience. 11.1% of postgraduate students reported that in the survey compared to 4.9% undergraduate students. Which is surprising to me as well, because I would have thought that there were larger numbers of undergraduate students undertaking WIL activities, and therefore you would probably see a higher proportion of those students reporting, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Or maybe postgraduate students are just more confident in reporting the incident. Although this survey wasn't necessarily reporting to the university, it was just reporting that they had experienced that. The survey also looked, so the survey asked more generally around sexual harassment, but then they focused in on what was the most impactful incident and where that occurred, and some demographics around that. Again, the most likely location is general campus areas, 43.3%. but there is still a component of people who had their most impactful incident occur during their work experience or professional placement experience. Interestingly, students, 6.6% of students aged between 25 and 34, 7.2% of postgrad coursework students, 6.3% of those who speak a language other than English at home, and 7.8% of international students experience their most impactful incident within a work experience or professional placement context. So that's pretty large numbers, I think. Most students are reporting that their most impactful incident involved a male or males. And the most likely context to involve a male perpetrator is work experience or professional placement, with 92.1% of respondents saying it was a male perpetrator in that environment. Hospitality or retail areas off campus were also quite high, 91.2%. And 60.7% of students had indicated that the perpetrator was a student from the university. 0.9% of students had indicated that it was a supervisor at their placement site. So most of the incidences are occurring between students rather than their supervisor, although there is a small percentage of sexual harassment occurring initiated by the perpetrator being the supervisor of the placement. If we now move on to sexual assault, 1 in 3 have been sexually assaulted in their lifetime. 1 in 20 have been sexually assaulted within a university context, and 1.1% of students have been sexually assaulted within a university context within the last 12 months. 4% of students said it was within their work experience or professional placement context. But by far, the most common locations are student accommodation and residences. It's definitely more than half of the incidences are occurring in those kinds of spaces. So if we look at gender and age of the victim survivors, 6% of females have been sexually assaulted in a university context, compared to 1.4% in the past 12 months. Almost double the amount for students who identify as being non-binary or used a different term to describe their gender expression. 9.4% of students who identify as transgender had experienced sexual assault, so much higher rates than even female students, and certainly much higher rates than male students. If we're looking at historically disadvantaged student groups, students with a disability, 1 in 10 have experienced sexual assault, compared to 3.4%, so 10% have experienced sexual assault, compared to 3.4% of other students. Within the last 12 months, that's 2.4% compared to 0.9%, so still quite large differences in the percentages. First Nations students, not quite double the amount, so 7.8% have experienced sexual assault in a university context, compared to 4.5% of other students. Looking at students who identify with diverse sexualities, again, pansexual and bisexual students seem to experience similar to sexual harassment. They experience sexual assault more compared to heterosexual students, 3.4% compared to 11.3%. So that's, we're getting close to 3 or 4 times that rate for bisexual students. Within the last 12 months, again, very similar, bisexual is still at the top, so 3% compared to 0.8% of heterosexual students. Again, most of the most impactful incidents, so like the sexual harassment component of the survey, students were asked about their most impactful incident. The locations were generally club societies or residential colleges or accommodation areas. 3.1% was within the work experience or professional placement context. And again, similar to sexual harassment, the majority of students reported that the perpetrator was male or were males. Females are more likely to be assaulted by males. Males are equally likely to be assaulted by males or females. And again, the perpetrator was another student, and a small percentage, 0.7%, indicated that it was their supervisor who sexually assaulted them. Still not good, I guess. If we look at reporting, most students don't make a formal report or complaint. And in fact, 1 in 2 don't know much about the university reporting process. And if there is a formal report or complaint made, then that's often not referred to the police. And the survey didn't unpack what those reasons were. When the students were asked about the way that how the university handled the reporting process, particularly those who had been sexually assaulted, 1 in 3 were satisfied, but more than half, about half, said that they were dissatisfied with the process. In fact, students actually said that they were re-traumatized by the process. Some of the most common barriers are that most people thought that they didn't need help, or that they thought that people wouldn't think it was serious enough to report, or they thought it was too hard to prove. What was even more worrying was that some people thought that the impact was going to impact on their studies or their career opportunities. 10.7% of students who experienced sexual harassment were worried that it would affect studies or career opportunities, compared to 17.4% of students who experienced sexual abuse. So even more students who experienced sexual abuse were worried that it was going to affect their studies or career opportunities, which is surprising and disappointing that that's a reason why people wouldn't want to report. Students were also asked about the support at their university. So distinct to the reporting process, how were they supported? 1/3 were satisfied with the university's support. 1 in 5 were dissatisfied. And again, there's a significant number of students who had experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault, but were worried that it was going to affect their studies or their career opportunities. And again, felt that they didn't need help, or they didn't think that it was serious enough to report. The support that they are, most students are finding support with their friends, so more than half of them are going to friends for support, which I guess is important. Why it's important we have these bystander training modules, because they are going to be, their friends are going to be a key person in supporting them through this kind of incident. Families to a lesser extent, and mental health professionals even lesser extent. Interestingly, non-binary students or gender diverse students were more likely to contact a mental health professional to get support compared to other groups. The survey also included some items around perceptions and attitudes, and some of the things that was highlighted in the survey were that First Nations students were less likely to feel safe or respected. That students who identified as bisexual or were questioning their sexuality were less likely to feel a sense of belonging. Bisexual identifying students also didn't feel safe on campus. And pansexual, asexual, bisexual were less likely to believe there's a clear sense of socially acceptable behaviour. Bisexual, pansexual, unsure or questioning, gay or lesbian were less likely to agree that their university was trying to protect the safety of all students. Some students feel that the universities are cultures that normalise sexual violence and do not minimise trauma of victims and survivors. As I said before, some students indicated in the survey that they felt re-traumatised by the university processes. And some students feel that universities do not walk the talk. So basically, we've got lots of policies and information on our website, but the experiences that students had didn't match with what was in those policies or on the website. So any questions around any of this content so far? No, we've got a few more minutes before officially the breakout sessions commence. For the breakout sessions, I thought we've got some suggested questions here. One would be, what are some of the strategies that have been put in place to ensure student safety during a WIL activity? And I know that there's a lot of, there's been a lot of activities that have been happening across universities over a number of years. Even prior to the first survey in 2016, a lot of universities were trying to tackle the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the university context. And TEXA have developed a guidance practice note, which has collated a number of the initiatives that universities have implemented over the years. That was published in 2020, so there may have been some additional initiatives that have come on board since then. But that TEXA guidance note is actually quite a good starting point, I think, for universities. It's almost like that's the baseline that TEXA will be using to assess whether universities are meeting these standards within the HESA legislation. All right, we'll open up the breakout sessions. If I could ask one person within each of the breakout sessions to put their hand up as the leader and to report back at the end of the session. So we will have about, how long have we got? We've got until, we've got about 50 minutes in total. I think we'll spend about 25 minutes in the breakout session, and then we'll report back to the wider group on the conversations that you have in your individual breakout groups. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and create the breakout groups. You'll be automatically assigned. We've got 40 people. We'll just give another minute or so for everyone to join back into the main room. And then we'll look to the facilitators of each of the groups, just giving a bit of a summary of the discussions that happened in your breakout groups. Okay, we should have everyone now back into the main room. I'm just going to go around each of the different breakout rooms and just get someone to just give a bit of a summary of some of the discussions that were happening in your group. So I will start with group one, room one. Do we have someone who was volunteered to be the leader of that group?
I think that was us.
That would be you, Matthew.
I was like, oh, what number were we?
Yeah, that's true. I probably should, I can still see who was in each of the groups. So I probably should say who was in the group and then who was the leader. What was your discussion focused on, Matthew?
Yeah, look, it was really good. And we worked through those questions and we were quite lucky that we had quite a range of different discipline areas. So through business to science to education and to social work as well. So it allowed us to have just a bit of a chat and a discussion there around the different nuances that sit across each of the discipline areas and spaces. And of course, you know, looking at the different university processes and then coming at it from different positions that people sat, whether they were a member of the professional team or whether they sat in an academic space and could look at how and where those processes align or perhaps didn't align and could align further in the future. Look, it was really good. I mean, we started, Mei-Ling was talking a lot around the business space and around, it's managing the student expectations as well and making sure that they're aware of their rights and they're aware of all of the what's out there and how to do that pre-prep and how hard that might be sometimes to get the students to engage in the pre-prep to take responsibility for their safety. But look, there was lots of it. Vince was talking a lot around the ability of the universities to establish their values as well, and to be able to hold those values when they're aligning student placements and actually looking at the industry providers to get a sense and a background check of their values to ensure that where they're placing their students is in the students' best interest to pick up those notions that you were talking about of social change and ensuring inclusivity and protecting the students, which was a really nice put through. Then there was quite a bit of discussion around those notions of producing modules and courses for students to engage in and where and how to embed those pre-placement to protect everybody involved, which then moved into Mei-Ling used the term, cover your ass, but what she was actually talking about was, and it was a really nice way of just saying about making sure that everyone has a really strong awareness of policies that are in place and that staff, students and agencies are aware of the policies and the reasons for doing things, and that everybody then agrees to those for the protection of everybody involved, and having that ability to draw back on those policies to inform the practices and as a protection mechanism. And then the discussion was just around those at the end there briefly around that social change and the responsibility that we hold within our positions, but also the universities to ensure that is what we stand for.
Yeah, definitely. I think universities historically have been organisations, institutions that have pushed for social change, and I think it's an important component of universities, which perhaps we've lost some of that sort of perspective in recent times, and certainly the issues in this space requires social change to occur. Obviously, a lot of the incidences are happening outside the university context, but even so, students are experiencing those having those experiences, and that will still impact on their studies and whether they continue to stay within their courses. As I mentioned, certain groups find it difficult and will cease doing their degree or interrupt their degrees, and then that creates an inequity in access to education as well. So then we start not having those students. So there's a whole snowballing effect that happens in this space, isn't it? Very good, thanks, Matthew. Now move on to room 2, which had Deb Pascoe, Emma Lee, Christy, Rochelle Pickard. Who was the leader of room 2?
We didn't really have a leader, but I'm happy to
thanks, Christy.
Just to provide a short summary. A lot of the points that were covered by group 1 and really mentioned the nuances of disciplines, but also nuances of the size of the organisation. So for the likes of business, media and communication, we do deal with startups. So it's hard to do your checks and balances when it might be a one person organisation. And that's probably where our incidents have come from. So yeah, how do you prevent that? We can do a lot of preparation. We can control, the messaging that goes out to organisations, but there's also an element of risk in working with, these sorts of smaller places where it's not as well controlled or as visible. We also talked about, the student preparation and expectations. And we also had a really wonderful initiative mentioned by UniSA where they have mentors dedicated to their interns. And we talked about students then having that relationship and that trust to talk to a person rather than, say, going through a system and recording it, via a online platform. They've actually got someone they can talk to, they trust them, they know they're going to be, and alleviate any fears around not graduating, affecting their long-term career career ambitions, etc. So yeah, I think it was really, great to hear what other universities are doing, and knowing that as a university we're still trying to evolve and build on what we're doing as well.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Christy.
No worries.
Group 3, Alexis, Donnell, Lindy and Nigel were in that group. Can we have someone to provide a bit of a summary of your discussion, please?
Nigel, did you take some notes?
Anything around student preparation, in particular, any resourcing or
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Donnell.
So here at UTAS, we also have mentors attached to our education students who go out on placement, and that's a key link for our students if there's anything that arises that they need extra information around or support. And then obviously then there's the portal where that they can identify any issue that comes up for a more university-wide thing with our SAFCU unit, which is Safe and Fair Community Unit. I'm just having to get my notes up, sorry, because I did take some notes. So pre-placement is really important. So that whole notion of discussion and having aspects that exist before placement occurs. I think Alexis raised this, where there's opportunity for students to really understand what their scope is when they're out on placement, and understanding clear documentation and processes around grievances, and involving students in discussions regarding expectations re-policy, and that whole notion of supporting them in their transition from their learning environment to their placement or their workplace then means that they are part of the change creation that can occur around this space of what is appropriate and what is not, and how do we ensure that we have safer workplaces. Did that answer everything?
I think so. No, very good. Excellent. Group 4 was Amanda Cook, Brian Logan, Melissa Howard, Nalini and Renee Cherry.
Beautiful. So I've been assigned on this one. So we talked quite a bit about the preparation of students. We also talked a little bit about sort of the infrastructure that supports students, so particularly if they're travelling remotely and staying in accommodation remotely. And then also host or organisation supervision. So they were kind of our 3 themes. And UQ talked about their 5 in 5, so 5 short videos talking about 5 topics as pre-placement that can be rolled out across any discipline area, because clearly, for veterinary science, you're going to need a very different level of preparation than doing 100 hours in an office. But these are the sort of 5 fundamental entry conversations for every student across the university. So, that really was looking at how do we do something standardised university-wide that then allows that nuance and add on top, depending on the environments they're going to. So for a clinical setting, they're getting a huge amount of preparation for that clinical environment, like I say, versus the business side of things. That really sort of, how do we create something that's universal, but then can be rolled out into the various areas, became part of our conversation. We also talked about the preparation or the support in the workplace. So for the workplaces themselves, quite often our agreements or the information we share is shared to the organisation, not necessarily the people who are going to be working with the students on a day-to-day basis. So we were talking about different ways of how we can make sure we're supporting the supervisors and informing the supervisors, not just the organisation as a whole. So certainly that was a bit of a gap. And then we talked about the different ways we can remain in contact with students throughout the placement, so the mentor or liaison contact. But then also we have found that some students are happier to just tick a box in a survey than physically talk to somebody. That then allows someone to reach out to them. So asking them a simple question around, do you feel safe in your workplace or on your placement? They can tick yes or no, it's not as threatening, and then someone can reach out. So just looking at different ways to make sure that we're not limiting the options students have to identify, and we're not creating a barrier because they feel that it might affect their study, those sorts of things. And then we were talking right at the very end, we got into a little bit around risk assessments and the conflict between creating rigorous risk assessments that we present to our organisations versus putting organisations off hosting our students when they're, we're so grateful and so in need of placements. How do we find that balance between being really careful in how we assess a work environment versus not making it so they just don't want to be involved?
Yes, very.
And we didn't solve the problem around how universities can create social change. We didn't solve that one.
I mean, one of the suggestions that TEXA have included in their good practice note is around potentially embedding some of this content within curriculum, and therefore all students then will get some kind of exposure to these kinds of issues. At QUT, we've and I'm sure other universities are using similar kinds of training modules, but mate and bystander training modules, so that students have a little bit more awareness and are equipped with some skills to be able to speak up if they're a bystander and they witness or hear sexual harassment or sexual abuse going on. All right, room number 6 is next. Alicia, Kerry and Susie.
Hi guys, so I think that we had a pretty similar conversation that Nalini did. We weren't necessarily the largest group and probably really involved in a lot of this stuff. However, we did really speak about some of the resources that we do provide our students when they're going out onto work integrated learning, really trying to educate them before they actually get into the workplace. At Kaplan, a lot of our students actually have to do a prerequisite elective subject as well, which really talks about working in Australia and what that culture looks like. So it really tries to make them feel more comfortable with that. We also work with internship providers, so they do have that level of risk management in making sure that the companies that we're working for are really reputable, and that we do a lot of ongoing check-ins with the students as well, so they've got a lot of support. But yeah, luckily, none of us have actually experienced this, which is not a bad problem, obviously. But yeah, we kind of just spoke a little bit more about those kind of things that we've been doing.
Excellent. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you.
Room 7 next is Cassandra Murphy, Claire, Kylie, Megan, and someone else who doesn't look like their name. It's a mixture of their surname and first name.
Hi, we're here at
Hi, Kylie.
in all of the above. So we discussed quite a few different things. Our participants were sort of across health, education, and we really didn't, in the roles that we have, we didn't really identify that much with what actually does happen within the university processes, but more about how we prepare students for placements and the things that we discuss in that way. And we all talked about how the preparation for placement and the information that we provide, but I think we all agreed that we probably could provide more information on what to do if you feel unsafe or uncomfortable around your WIL or your placement experience, and also having a better awareness of the code of conduct as a student on placement, and perhaps implementing some sort of module, like you were just talking about, Ricky, with regard to, I noticed my kids have just started uni and they have to do academic integrity modules. So you're right, maybe they should do a code of conduct and safety module when they start uni, so that they're very aware of not only what the responsibilities are, but then how to report if you're feeling unsafe or uncomfortable with some behaviour. So we really did talk about everything that everybody else has raised. And yeah, we discovered actually that at our units, remember, we have some really, really good systems in process. It's just a matter of how we then promote that to our students to utilise if they need to.
I think that's really key, isn't it? I mean, from the survey, a lot of people weren't aware of what the university processes were. And I have to admit, as a staff member, I wasn't really across all of the processes until quite recently I started looking into what it should be. So I think we suffer that quite a bit across universities in multiple areas where access to supports are just not known by students and sometimes by staff themselves. So how do we promote all those kinds of great resourcing that's developed, just in time for when they need to actually access any of those supports? Very good. Thank you, Kylie. Final group, Charmaine, Cindy, and Tracy.
Hi, Ricky and everyone. So I guess we said it, and discussed very similar to everyone else. We talked about our resources and infrastructures. The idea that Kylie brought up also was that when do you start this type of training with, and we had a discussion about, school leavers and 2 months later in an adult institution. One of the resources that say JCU uses is they outsource, especially in vet placement, veterinary science placements, because their placements are very different to, say, health placements, in that they have the police come in and talk about occupational violence, sexual harassment by, as you know, most regional or police services have dedicated staff to this. So we employ them to come out. Then the discussion rose about when then do you just start that? In first year, they are already nervous. And so we don't have it as a standalone topic. We use other resources and we're discussing different modules, or different topics, themes throughout that first year of being on campus. Some of the barriers is that we actually, universities are relying on the students to report. And so it's not probably, we identified that it's probably not a once only conversation, and that's probably needs to be raised regularly to remind them, and the first point of call should be someone that they actually can contact, trust, not get an email that says I will respond in 48 hours, that type of thing. Someone identified that course coordinators are sometimes one of the great barriers to, because they really didn't take on this role or are a bit frightened to have that training on conversations themselves. And the actual module, the actual self-sourcing of placements also creates a greater hazard, in that people, we're really not identifying those or seeing those organisations. People are tick flicking to get through their safety measures. And so versus, health placements or structured placements in large organisations that have safety measures in place. So that was just a summary.
Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate that. That's really, really good to hear what's going on across multiple universities across the country. We talked a lot about student preparation.
Sorry,
yes.
Ricky, you forgot group 5.
Oh, sorry. Group 5. How could I forget? Kayleen, Kim, Kylie, Ciara. That I presume, Ciara, you're the speaker for the group?
No, it's Sarah. No.
Sorry.
No, I'm not actually. I think
that's Kylie.
Kylie put her hand up reluctantly.
Sorry, I was going to jump in if I miss anything though. We had a really healthy conversation, and a lot of it was around the challenges that we face. So there is a really big challenge that was which I know has been brought up. How far can we push expectations on our placement providers before they say no to us as well? So there's a really fine balance there that we try and maintain really clear expectations for supervising and teaching practices. But also we've got to maintain the stakeholder relationship too, because sustainability of our placement programs and actually having the locations for the students to go to. Our group had a very wide range of roles and experiences, but we did find that a lot of the challenges that we have are unified and common. We talked about placement agreements and trying to, or embedding expectations early before the students are going on placement. One of my departments at my university has created a really good quality framework, which has supervision expectations for the students and teaching practices as well, and then measures that through a traffic light system, which they then use to, I guess, monitor the quality of the placement provider. Recording information, though, is a very sensitive topic when it comes to privacy and legal, especially if you're recording information on the student. It's not like an employee file, for example. And just talked a little bit about our strategies, I guess, for what we might do in the future to improve those situations, outlining our processes and our reporting lines as well. As documenting the risks and following up on the feedback and the requirements. We've also implemented a committee at our university which sits next to the reporting lines, and they will, the reporting lines, which is your schools and your departments, your heads of schools, they will handle the risk, but then we have a committee on the side that's doing all the strategy and the assessment to look for opportunities to reduce that risk moving forward for the students.
Thanks, Colleen, and apologies for missing room number 5 again. Very good. It sounds like there was some really good discussions going on, and particularly around how we prepare students. Does anyone have any particular comments or any feedback around what they're doing within their university around during on placement? Is anyone using any kinds of safety apps or anything like that? Many universities use a safe zone app, but that generally is on campus only. There are some safety apps that are connected to a third party that can respond to incidences while students are off campus. And I know that there are some universities who are exploring that those kinds of applications to be able to support students on placement. And generally those applications are intended for not situations where you necessarily need to contact emergency services or police in any way. It's a little bit lower down before you get to that situation, and allows for someone to come out and provide some support after hours even to the student. And that obviously means that university staff resources aren't being taken up by responding to those kinds of instances. So there are some other things out there. Obviously, there's a huge challenge for universities to combat racism, ableism, body shaming, phobias related to diverse genders and sexualities as well. So thank you, everyone. Yes, someone, Sondo, that's the application that I was referring to. I don't know whether there's other ones available, but Sondo is one that some universities are using. All right, so thank you, everyone. We'll now move on to the next part of the program. I believe Ondine is online.
Hi, everybody.
Ondine Bradbury is our manager of the research project grant, and she is here today to introduce the next session of the program. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And I'm in the lovely Gladstone region today, so I'd just like to pay my respects to the First Nations of the Balai, the Gurung, the Gurang, and the Turel Balang Bunda peoples while I'm up here, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And it's great to be here in this beautiful part of the country out of Melbourne for a little bit. And I have the pleasure today to introduce our next session in the webinar series for today. And it's one of our successful applicants for the project grant program for 2022 from Federation University. So the title of the project is Sport Management Competencies in Australia, a Pilot Survey. And the aim of the project was to develop a valid and reliable survey tool to provide a resource identifying industry needs and confirming current essential competencies. And the extended aim was that this could be then used nationally across sport management industry and also within work integrated learning, other sectors that implement work integrated learning. So we have our project lead, Dr. Deborah Pascoe, with us today. And I'd like to acknowledge also another of the members of the project. So Deborah was the chief investigator, and then Lindy Hall is, I'm not too sure if Lindy's here today, but I'd like to recognise Lindy. And today we're having one of the other members of the team, Megan Hekkema, who I hope I've said that right. Apologies, Megan, please let me know. And Megan's going to be presenting on behalf of the team today. And I'll put it over to Megan now to feel free to share screen. And we are looking forward to hearing your presentation today. There we go.
Thank you. You can see the screen.
Looks great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having us. My name is Megan and my supervisors Deb and Lindy are also here today. Federation University Australia acknowledges the custodians of the lands and waters where our campuses are located and recognises the continuing responsibilities to care for country at these sites of teaching and learning. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander First Nations peoples. There's nothing permanent except change. And I'd like you to think about your industry and has your industry changed? Feel free to type into the chat your industry and briefly explain how it's changed. Perhaps your industry has changed through globalization and that's affected how your industry operates. Or perhaps technology, especially social media, or maybe a global pandemic. The sport management industry has undoubtedly changed. So for students to have successful field experience, be employable and prepared for future skills within their chosen industry, university curricula must align with industry's current and future needs. As change is not specific to the sport management industry, I want to explain how and why we constructed a valid and reliable survey tool to provide a resource to identify industry needs and confirm current essential competencies within sport management. Hopefully you will consider applying for a NAFEA grant and using the same process to ensure your curricula aligns with the industry's current and future needs. So to outline today, we will cover the literature and the why, the NAFEA grant, the course audit, the competency survey development, the modified Delphi process, the survey pilot, the next steps, and lessons learned. Let's begin with the literature and the why. It was clear from the literature that the sport management industry had changed. Changes in sport are expected, but recent changes to sport have included a global pandemic, the developing nature and use of technology, the increased use of social media, the increased use of analytics, and the globalization of sport, all resulting in an evolving sport management industry. Through the literature and my role overseeing the sport management placements and internship programs at Federation University, it became apparent that generic national employability skills are informing the Australian sport management curricula, and there is a gap between student and industry needs. The more I was teaching and therefore looking at the literature, the more discussions I began having with my WIL colleagues, particularly Lindy, who has the office just next door. With the support of Deb and Lindy, I enrolled into my honours, and shortly after, Deb suggested applying for the NAFEA grant, which I'll hand over to Deb to discuss.
Thank you, Megan. As an academic, it's one of those things that you want to foster a career in people. And when Megan wanted to do the honours, then I try and expand the experience of that academic. And one of those is to secure grant funding. So the NAFEA grant was a natural progression. The first steps, and just walking you through it though from a university point of view, was that the funding was advertised and it requires a little bit of planning. So I was aware of the NAFEA grants coming up, which is something that I think people need to plan for, because they generally are offered on a regular basis throughout a year or annually, etc. But I wasn't aware that even with small grants, the process of the university, I'd been on other grants, larger grants, but not necessarily the principal investigator on those grant funding procedures. So what I discovered was that I needed to have an expression of interest in 15 days before funding deadline, and it wasn't quite 15 days by the time I discovered that with our university. And as I said, even with small grants, they need to go through the budgeting and costings. They need to have everything approved by as high as the DVCRI. So that is the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation. So it all needs to go all the way up to the top. And as I said, for such a small grant, and a very significant grant from our point of view, we needed to go through the full processes. I can't thank enough for our support from the research funding services. They were absolutely fantastic with the budgeting and costing. They helped us out with filling out all the forms and actually getting it through the processes, and of course managing to get the DVCRI to actually sign off it in a timely manner. So the application went in, and it was really important to follow the guidelines, and again, writing the letter of support so that the DVCI would actually sign it in a timely fashion and then get the submission in. We were lucky enough to be successful, and we used that money to support Megan's research, in that it allowed us to then gain a contract for research assistance, which was really helpful, I think, in the processing and just managing the timeframes and things, because with that we have to support the terms and conditions that come along with the NAFEA grant, and also the terms and conditions that the university has complied to as well. And again, it needed from our point of view to go right through to the whole university process in that funding situation. Also, just meeting the compliance of funding all the way through. You just need to be aware that you do have processes, and as the principal investigator, I definitely protected Megan and even Lindy to some extent from this that goes on in the background, because the paperwork is a lot sometimes, and I know in that process of, it looks like you're just doing a project report at 6 months and then a final project report, and then someone else will acquit the funds. But there is a lot of paperwork that goes backwards and forwards to make sure that the university is complying, and if they get audited, that everything works really well from that point of view. And I know that can be a turn-off for people applying for funding, is that initial phase of being prepared before you apply for the funding and all of the paperwork that goes through it. But I would urge anybody to apply for the funding and seek that support, because it really is worth it. And I know it's been extremely valuable in supporting Megan and her research as she's gone through, and she's done a wonderful job. So thank you, NAFEA, and thank you, Megan. And I'll hand back to you, Megan. Thanks.
Thank you, Deb. And yes, thank you, Deb, for all your support with the grant. So with the NAFEA grant organised, we started, sorry, I've lost my slides. We've started the course audit to investigate what universities are currently teaching sport management students in Australia for the first time. The first step was identifying universities, programs, and courses. Universities were retrieved from University Australia's website. A program search for each university was then completed using the term sport to identify any bachelor's degrees in sport management or similar programs. The search identified 33 programs across 16 universities. Universities and programs were excluded from the final list when the degree outcomes were not considered core sport management outcomes or any double degree programs. Information for each of the included sport management programs was collected through publicly available information to examine the program's curricula delivered in 2021. For each program, a list of required or compulsory courses was documented, excluding any elective courses. Across the 11 universities and 11 reviewed programs, 174 courses were identified as required courses. The second step was to conduct a content analysis, creating coding areas from accreditation standards and reviewing institutional websites. The Commission on Sport Management Accreditation, also known as COSMA, outlines common professional components, which were used as the basis for coding areas. After reviewing institutional websites, some additional coding areas were added and others combined, resulting in these coding areas. Across the 11 undergraduate sport management degrees, management concept courses were the most commonly required courses, followed by sport marketing and sport finance, budgeting, accounting, and economics. The least common courses were technology and sport sales, which had no courses offered, followed by public relations and ethical aspects. Interestingly, WIL opportunities were rare, with just 5 out of 174 required WIL courses. With the literature review and the course audit, we had a lot of information that we needed to refine into a list of competency statements for an easy-to-use survey. Which brings us to the competency survey development. I'll guide you through this diagram, which shows where the competencies came from and how they were refined. Let's start in the top left corner. From the literature, a list of competency statements was compiled from the following sources: the competencies of sport managers, the competencies of sport event managers, the recreational sport competency analysis, the core skills for work framework, and the global framework on core skills for life and work in the 21st century. This combined to a total of 302 competency statements. The list of competency statements were refined by removing any exact duplicates, combining and eliminating competencies. This refinement resulted in the reduction of competency statements to 177. At this point, the approach shifted to incorporate the COSMA accreditation and course audit. Here you can see the themes from the COSMA Common Professional Components. From the literature review and the course audit, the COSMA Common Professional Component themes were adjusted, as listed here, with each of the 177 competency statements allocated to a theme. Some statements did not fit a theme and were removed as they were deemed irrelevant. So, for example, demonstrates good personal fitness. It just wasn't required. The result of the competency survey development process was 32 encompassing competency statements to be reviewed by our experts in the modified Delphi. 7 experts were invited to take part in the modified Delphi process. The experts were selected as they were known to have previously held or be currently holding a sport management academic position at an Australian university. We had planned to use Qualtrics to conduct the modified Delphi, But unfortunately, things didn't quite go to plan. After creating and testing the survey, it was released to the experts, who soon informed us that they were being logged out of the survey before they could complete or save their answers. We made the call to pause the Delphi so we could find an alternate solution. This was disappointing, but it was also great, as it demonstrated how committed the experts were to thoroughly reviewing and providing feedback on the competencies. After looking at some alternatives, part 1 of the modified Delphi process was resent to the experts as a fillable Word document. The experts were requested to consider the 32 competency statements and their need across the sport management industry. The experts were asked to use a tick box where more than one option could be selected for each statement. A section for text was also provided for each statement so that modifications or suggested changes to wording could be made. The final question asked the experts to list any competencies that may have been missed. Where a consensus was not reached, the feedback was used to update the competency statements. In part 1B of the modified Delphi, 12 statements were sent back to the experts for review. The same format as part 1 was used, with the addition of the experts' feedback being included with each of the statements. In the second and final stage of the modified Delphi, the experts were sent a link to a Qualtrics survey, which did work this time. In the survey, experts were asked to rate each competency statement on a 4-point Likert scale. For each competency statement, the item content validity index was calculated. This was to determine the validity of each competency statement. The modified Delphi process resulted in 30 competency statements to be used in the survey pilot. The survey was created in Qualtrics and contained the 30 competency statements to be rated on a Likert scale with a demographic section. And this brings us to another issue with this study, getting sport managers to respond. The response rate was very low. So to send the survey out to additional sport managers, we were required to amend our ethics application and then redistribute the survey. 21 responses were collected from sport managers completing the survey, with analysis completed in SPSS. Cronbach's alpha for the 30-item survey was 0.908 and therefore deemed reliable. This brings us to the next steps. Already through this research and the NAFEA grant, we've been able to present the course audit at the ASIN conference. This experience was a great opportunity to attend my first conference, and the poster wasn't as scary as presenting, and the poster had the benefit of being displayed for the duration of the conference. At the conference, I was able to discuss the research with like-minded people, and the NAFEA grant was an interesting conversation starter. The research has also given us the opportunity to submit a paper to the Sport Management Educational Journal with additional papers to be completed. In 2023, we hope to distribute the Sport Management Competency Survey nationally so we can continue to ensure university curricula aligns with the industry's current and future needs. I'll now finish with our lessons learned. A good team is essential, and not just wonderful supervisors, but also the wider team, including research staff, as Deb mentioned earlier. Take opportunities, even those outside your comfort zone. As a new researcher, the NAFEA grant has been a great learning experience, and not just for me, but also for my supervisors. Setbacks and hurdles will happen, It might be grant applications, survey responses, or sick kids. But there are only 5 rules you need to remember. Make the plan, execute the plan, expect the plan to go off the rails, throw away the plan, follow your supervisor's lead, and you'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan and team from Federation University. That was really great research that you've been doing there, Megan, and Deb and Lindy. I myself was completely blown away by a couple of things that I think just starting at the start, this notion of aligning with current and future needs and beginning that audit process is so valuable and so doable in all of our contexts. So we can look at that in our own platforms in a small scale developmental stage for looking into our future years that we're, I guess, at the start of each year, and have a bit of a look, or incrementally. So I really loved that aspect that you started there. But I think that, and I think that everyone will agree that going through those stages, including your modified Delphi and reaching out to experts in the field and getting responses to create a reliable and valid survey tool, Megan, wow, in that time, I just am in awe of your work there. So I will open it up to questions. So if anyone has a question, please pop a hand up, and we can get to that in one moment, and I'll see that on our participant list. I had a couple of questions about, you mentioned right at the start, Megan, about change in the field, and queried everyone around that, and we got some comments there, and thank you so much to participants for that. So we had Kylie and Ricky talking about the impact of COVID there, and so did and Sarah's saying thank you, Megan. So I was wondering, Megan, was there a baseline of what you were thinking in your team about how sports management has changed? And was there something that was the catalyst for that? What made you all think this would be an interesting avenue to go down? Apart from the literature, if it was just backed from your convos at the start.
Sure. I think before I even really started looking at the literature, I'd been talking to a lot of supervisors, and there was a lot of feedback from supervisors around communication and technology skills lacking. And so the technical skills versus those sort of softer skills as well, I was interested to see whether the courses that we were teaching, whether there was more emphasis on the technical skills and perhaps not enough emphasis on the soft skills. So that's probably where it really started for me. And then I delved further into the literature and realized just how much had been changing in the industry, and yet research and our courses probably really are not keeping up.
Oh, that's great. And it's often that the way that it goes, everyone, of having those first conversations with your team that will be that catalyst, as Megan's mentioned, to go further and think maybe if we had a little bit of money, we'd be able to spend some time and dig a bit deeper into this, which is, I think you said that so eloquently in your presentation. I just had one more question. I know, Ricky, you've got your hand up there. I was wondering whether there'd be anything that you would change if you were able to go back and trial the survey again. I know you mentioned that you had a really low response rate from the participants that you needed to test your tool, and about the competency scales. And I think that when you said that, I was kind of nodding to myself that that's commonly what I find in the education area, that we just don't get that much feedback from our stakeholder groups in the schools and organizations that we survey. But is there anything that you would change in general?
Yes, definitely sending it out to more sport managers. And when we first did the ethics application, perhaps not being quite as specific with who that pool was going to be, we could have made that a little bit more generic so that we could have put the survey out to more sport managers in the first instance. But probably the bigger lesson learned, well, because with that, I did learn that you can amend your ethics application, and that's not the end of the world if you have to do it. It's a bit more paperwork, but it is doable. But it was probably using Qualtrics. I'd never used Qualtrics before, and I probably didn't talk to those who had used it in more detail. So when we realized that things weren't working as they should be, we then probably started having more conversations with those that had used it, and they had so many fantastic tips and tricks that I just wasn't aware of and that we hadn't thought of. So although we had done what I thought was a fantastic job of testing it before we sent it out, there are a few things that we could have done better if we had have just asked a few more people that have used it a lot more than what Deb and Lindy had, and myself being a newbie.
Thanks, Megan. And I think personally, Qualtrics, if you have institutional membership, everyone, it is a quite intuitive tool to use to develop. So, and Megan's nodding the head there. So and you can do informal data collection as well that doesn't have that ethics attached. If anyone's interested in surveying stakeholder groups, that number one, Qualtrics, very intuitive. Number two, ethics or no ethics, it's as long as we're not doing much with that data and it's just informing evaluations and things like that, it can be a really great start to get the pulse check on our stakeholder groups, can't it? Megan, I think Ricky had a question for you there.
I did. I just was interested to know, once you've got the competencies, is that going to then, is there a plan to look at assessment and how those competencies would then be assessed, and having some kind of national, assessment tool for sports management?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, at the moment, we're mostly using generic competencies within sport management, which it's not a bad and horrible thing, but it would be great to have something a bit more specific which does combine for sport management both those softer sort of skills with the technical skills as well. So we could then use that in curricula and looking at our courses too, and how they align and how they're preparing students for their careers in sport management. So I think there's quite a few possibilities once we do have that information and a tool that we can continue to confirm what is happening within the industry.
Because one of the things that is common across many disciplines is industry partners, and particularly supervisors, having to navigate the different kinds of assessments that at different universities. So having something where there's an agreed competencies and an agreed assessment would obviously have a positive impact on the work integrated learning space in your discipline and any disciplines, because you don't have to have the supervisors being unfamiliar with what the competencies that they're assessing. But thank you very much, Megan. Enjoyed the presentation greatly.
And just to add to that,
moment,
I think sorry, Deb.
No, I was just going to say, at the moment, Megan's done such a wonderful job on this one that Lindy and I are both encouraging her to continue on to a PhD. And I think we might cover that, Ricky, if she's willing to stay with the process.
And maybe applying for another NAFEA grant as well to help fund some of the additional project.
Watch this space.
And we've got this all recorded, so you can't go back now, Megan. It's the trajectory has been recorded. So a big thank you again to Megan, Deborah and Lindy and the team there at Federation University. Again, congratulations on acquiring the grant as well. And gosh, what a lot of work that you did. It was absolutely impressive to have a valid tool developed in that time, Megan. I'm just so, wow, I'm blown away. But I do encourage all of our members that are here today to have a look at when the project grant opens again in the new year, and think about a team that you might be able to get together to talk about possibilities in your space for small scale projects, and a really supportive team here at NAFEA who really want to see research back into our WIL space at every level. So thank you again to Federation Uni, and over to you, Ricky.
Thank you, Ondine, and thank you, Megan and the team. That concludes the second session for the webinar series today. We'll now take a break for 45 minutes. So we'll reconvene for the discipline breakout sessions this afternoon. So 10:45 Western Australia, 12:15 Northern Territory, 12:45 Queensland, 1:15 South Australia, and 1:45 New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. So we'll see everyone in about 45 minutes for the discipline breakout session. So thank you, everyone, and see you very soon.